Yeah, I think when you look at this chart, it just kind of makes sense in a way and kind of highlights that as we change as a society in one area, right? Like we're on our phones all the time. That doesn't just mean that, oh, we're not watching movies as much or we're not going outside as much. It also affects everything else, right?
The Gen Z Podcast. 4 voices, unfiltered opinions on today's topics. We welcome you to speak freely and think deeply about today's episode.
Welcome back to the Gen Z Podcast, where we dive into the topic of dating today, online dating. We begin with the statistics around how many Gen Zs are single, how many Gen Zs use dating apps, the rise in dating apps as well. And then we go into technology's role in Gen Z dating, and then the attitudes towards relationships and how those are progressing. Then we end the podcast with solutions and how we can retract from this online world that has caused so many different issues and things that have changed in our lives. So we hope you enjoy the podcast. And this is episode 37. Let's dive in.
Alrighty, dear audience, we have a interesting podcast for you today. The topic is one that tends to be shied away from and can be quite awkward to talk about, but is very important not only to our individual lives, but also for the future of the world and our species. What is it, you might be wondering? It is the important topic of dating. So, as many of you know from being a part of Gen Z or parents of Gen Z or friends of Gen Z, the dating culture and landscape has shifted. So today we're going to talk about what that shift is, the statistics behind it, dive into what the causes of that shift are, and then brainstorm some solutions, how we think that our generation can improve dating and the dating culture in the future. So as of today, 75% of Gen Z are single. Now keep in mind, Gen Z is currently 12 to 27, so I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that the 12-year-olds are single. They have some time to figure themselves out. 75% of Gen Z are single. 74% of millennials and Gen Z are using dating apps. And of the ones on dating apps, 90% say that they're frustrated with these dating apps. So that's a big part of the conversation today and the causes. And the first one that we're going to dig into is the effect of technology's role on Gen Z dating. And the first topic is the one that I think is the largest, and that is dating apps. We have a chart that we will share in the show notes, and that chart shows how people met. Has a dramatic increase up and to the right of online dating, people who met online. Here we go, here's the chart. And the other more traditional ways, met in a bar, met through friends, through family, in school, neighbors, in church, has collectively declined as the amount of people that met online inclines. The only one that also went up is met in a bar or restaurant. So this is a pretty seismic shift in the way that people have met as compared to how our parents may have met or how our grandparents may have met. So, my dear fellow co-hosts, what do you make of this?
There's a lot here, right? And they just have this almost seemingly infinite amount of options. And those infinite options lead to non-commitment. And in particular, like this non-commitment can lead to, I don't know, just going on the dating apps for fun and just looking through all the options, knowing that you have all these options. And that is kind of the lure of meeting online. And as you can see, 40% now of relationships start by meeting online. So that I'm expecting to continue because that's definitely where the world is going. But I just wonder about the implications of that. Like how does that impact just going forward and how we see relationships in the future? Because in my opinion, if you meet in a bar, that's a much more kind of solid footing and there's finite options around you you decide to go up to that person, you actually went out of your way to explore that option. And same with met through a coworker or met in church or a neighbor or all of the other options. But meeting online means that you see maybe 6 pictures of this person, you see 3 sentences that encompass the entirety of that person. So it's a lot like the context of like Instagram, for example. You see all of the best parts of their life and it's just posted on one profile, and I feel like that leads to reaching out to the person. Then even if you do go as far as meeting with them, then your expectations are much higher. Therefore, it's less likely to lead to anything significant. Whereas in person, there's just a completely different energy and there's a completely different vibe towards the relationship. So, I don't know. I think it will lead to a lot of just non-commitment. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think when you look at this chart, it just kind of makes sense in a way, and kind of highlights that as we change as a society in one area, right? Like we're on our phones all the time. That doesn't just mean that, oh, we're not watching movies as much or we're not going outside as much. It also affects everything else, right? So it affects the dating pool, right? So that skyrockets. And like everything else in this statistic, met in church is going down. Met in college, I think there's less and less men are going to college. So how are you going to meet your mate in college if you don't go to college, right? So I think that's the thing that really strikes out to me in this chart. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. First of all, the chart is striking, and I think that this is the crux of what we're getting into today. Is there's been a huge shift with technology, and this is something that we've talked about in past episodes, the rise of technology. And now we're focusing that lens on, okay, how does that affect dating and how does that affect Gen Z dating in particular? Because when we all came of age in the technological era, this is the new normal for us, right? Gavin, you hit on the things I really wanted to talk about as it relates to online dating. One is I remember feeling incredibly strange making a Hinge profile, because it's like, how can this capture who a person is? Like you said, 6 photos, 3 lines, maybe like a little voice note or something. How can that capture who you are as a person? The intricacies of who you are. And I found it to be quite reductionist. And then the other thing, and I think that you said it so perfectly, it gives the illusion of infinite choice. And when I was having conversations with people in preparation for this episode, friends and other young people, that was the number one thing that kept on coming up was you go on these dating apps after you make this reductionist profile of yourself and swiping on other reductionist profiles. And if something's a little bit wrong in the profile, next. Let's say that you actually make it to have a conversation, they say something a little bit weird, next. Let's say that you make it on a date, they don't check all the boxes or something isn't wrong, next. And that didn't happen as much when it was just the girls in your school or the girls in your town. And you would have had to have some more grace with people and some more empathy, because A, they know your family, B, you're going to have to see them around and you can't just ghost them or fall off the map, and C, you had more of an inclination to make it work because you didn't have the perception of, okay, I can just go on my phone and have another date in 20 minutes. I think that these are the main causes of this kind of frustration, why 90% of the people that are using dating apps aren't satisfied with it, are those 2 main points.
I also want to hit on the point of the fact that when you pool a group of people together on these dating apps, there's statistics, I'm not sure the exact numbers, but it's around 80% of the opposite gender, let's say men, will go for the top 10% of women. And then the other way around too, 80% of the woman will go for 10% of the men. So that frustration and that statistic of 90% of people being frustrated is most likely due to the fact that 90% of people are either being ignored or not getting the attention that they think they deserve. And I think that is a huge issue as well, because then that leads to a whole nother host of issues of like, oh, doubting yourself, things like that. But also just the fact that meeting online is that reductionist attitude where people just think that there's infinite options. So I guess what does that lead to, and where's the future of dating apps? Like, how can we kind of pull back on that?
Well, to keep it away from solutions and just talk about dating apps in particular, Match.com put out a survey that I highly recommend people look into. They can go to singlesinamerica.com, and it's a fun infographic on dating perspectives throughout different generations. One of the statistics is 23% of Gen Z would use an AI chatbot in dating. So I think that that's another one of the main points in still focusing on how technology is impacting dating is online persona versus offline persona. Okay, so you see these 6 pictures and these 3 sentences that this potential partner makes. And then you start chatting with them and it's an AI chatbot. How are you supposed to get to know this person if it's like photoshopped photos and then an AI chatbot chatting with you, and then you meet with them in real life and you're like, who is this? I think that this is the way that the dating apps are accelerating, is it's just way too much volume to go through. So maybe these AI tools will be used to self-predict who they think the best matches will be. But what will that be based off of? That won't be based off of the glimmer in their eye or the way that they interact with people, their charisma. It's based off of these like strange photos and like soulless prompts that are used to try to elicit some response. I think I'm bearish. I don't know if any of these dating apps are publicly traded, but I think that they should be shorted if so. Because I think that there's going to be a reversion, not to get into the solutions too quickly, but I think that there's going to be a reversion to these other ways of meeting that are more authentic.
Well, I don't know. I think that you highlight a dystopian future of dating apps. I mean, in many ways, though, if you think about it logically, when you go to a bar, per se, like, or the other traditional ways of meeting people, it was a very small group of people that you could potentially talk to. Now, technically, you can speak to like a whole city of people and see what person kind of matches your interests and personality. So, I don't know. I think that there is potential promise in this. I also think, though, that there's a bigger issue underlying this, which is that people aren't really good in person, and aren't like going out and meeting people in person. There's a statistic here by the American Survey Center, which has said that 44% of Gen Z men today, so these are people older than 18, actually older than 20, report having no relationship experience at all during their teen years, double the rate for older men or older generations. And I mean, when we were 18, I mean, no one was really using dating apps. I mean, I'm sure there were some people, but it's definitely wasn't that popular. I think the big issue is that we're so focused on our phones all the time that to make a relationship work, you have to be really good in person with someone. And that means lifting your head up from your phone and having social skills. So I don't know if that turns out into something like classes in high school about how to not be awkward or like how to not be creepy. I don't know. But like, there has to be something, because I don't think you're going to get rid of dating apps. I mean, there is just so much power in like a dating app. It literally connects you to every person in a city. Just like social media, you're not going to get rid of it. There's so much opportunity, so much business that's created from it. There just has to be, I think, new almost institutions or parallel systems that help people process and like leverage these technologies to their fullest potential, right?
Yeah, just a side note, I would love to see Felipe Segura's class on on how to not be awkward taught to high school boys. I think that would be a real hit.
And I'd say I am the
Sitcom.
model for this. Okay, I'm saying
No,
these are the
you could
things.
do it. You'd be great. Yeah, I mean, and to that, one more statistic on this is 18% of Gen Zers said that overuse of tech devices had a negative impact on previous relationships. So yeah, to your point, that is a huge problem in the technology aspect. And to move the conversation forward, the second part of the causes, in my opinion, is attitudes towards relationships. And anecdotally talking to people about this, especially women, the largest segment in attitudes towards relationships, or the largest differential, is casual versus serious dating. And Gen Z men of our age range tending to opt for casual dating. Gavin, you mentioned earlier you're kind of falling into that bucket now. How do you guys see that impacting people in our generations being able to form and maintain healthy relationships?
Honestly, I think there's a couple factors here, and Felipe mentioned it, but I feel like this is all our episodes like combined into one, because one of the factors is just kids on their phones and becoming siloed in these different buckets based on what they like on social media, and therefore almost just isolating us from each other. So that's one of them. But the second is, I feel like the financial security aspect, and for me that's a big one, and just like finding almost purpose and like being rooted in that. And I think that's a huge factor for us because college is so expensive, rent is rising, and all of these different factors that we've discussed on previous episodes of how Gen Z is handling the financial burden of college and rent and just living. Some people moving back home. I'm at home right now because of that reason. So I think that those are definitely two of the biggest factors in terms of, okay, am I ready to sit down and get into a serious relationship? So I think that's the biggest one, and people are trying to just figure themselves out more almost before they commit.
That's interesting because that was almost the opposite of how I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it of like a hesitancy to commit and wanting all the perks of a relationship without having to give that commitment. You know, wanting to be able to go on dates, to have sexual relations, to have these sort of dating benefits without the liability or the responsibility of the commitment.
I think a lot of people simply don't date due to financial reasons. I'm gonna pull up a statistic.
There is a statistic. Oh, I beat you to it. I have it. It's in the show
Let's hear
notes.
it.
30% of millennials and Gen Z say that their financial situation is holding them back from dating. But I wonder how much of that is self-imposed. I mean, you hear stories all the time, especially in previous generations, of like couples that met as high school sweethearts or in their young 20s, and then they made a life together. You know, they built each other up together. They didn't wait until they were flushed with cash to then be able to move forward and get married. I don't think that's necessarily a prerequisite towards engaging in a serious relationship.
Here's a thought. What do you think about this? Like the fact that infinite choice is at play with these dating apps, and the fact that people want to get the best choice. And maybe that's leading to people thinking, okay, I need to be my best self and I have to wait until I'm there in order to sit down and get the best person for me. Like, do you think that would be a factor as well? In terms of themselves up and then waiting until they think that they're at their optimal dating potential?
I think that that's admirable, but like, when will be the perfect time? Like, not to put you on the spot, but like, what are you waiting for? Is it like a certain amount of money in the bank account? Is it, you know, certain salary expectations? Like, I think that these things, especially in love, it's so synergetic and it comes out It's magical in a way where you cross paths with somebody, and who knows, maybe some areas of your life will be going super well and maybe others won't. I think that it's admirable to want to build yourself up in any situation. And I think that us as young men and our listeners and anybody, no matter what their age, should always be trying to improve themselves. But to turn yourself off to life in general and such an important part of life, which is forming and developing intimate relationships, especially at this age where it's like we need to learn how to be in those relationships and how to make them healthy and how to communicate in relationships. I think it's a disservice to turn yourself off of that because of something like a financial commitment.
Yeah, to interject on that, I actually though think Gavin is pointing to something that is a real major reason why I don't think people are dating as much, is because I think there's an expectation, and I know this coming from myself, like growing up, my parents were like, you should probably not get married until you are 28, 29. That was like a great age. I think a couple decades before that, it was maybe a little bit more normal to get married at 25, 26. And the reason why they tell you to wait a little bit more is you should be more financially solvent when you get married, so that it's not such a grind at the beginning or whatever. And then if you have a baby, that like, how are you going to take care of it and whatnot? So I think that also can be a major reason, is people want to be financially secure when they get married. And that's more of an expectation or a psychological reason, Zach. Like, it might not be necessarily correct, but that might be just a cultural norm. And as we've been highlighting in this podcast, I don't think Gen Z particularly is doing the best financially, or in the traditional financial expectations that previous generations had, like owning a home, right? That would probably be a sign that you're doing decently well financially. Well, less and less people are owning homes, so you'd probably expect under those circumstances then less people would get married, if that's their expectation of what it requires to get married or have a serious relationship.
Yeah, 100%. And that makes sense. As we're talking about expectations around dating, our generation, as we've said, isn't hitting the same milestones developmentally and financially that previous generations have. And I can understand why that leads to some hesitancy in committing to a relationship. But frankly, I think that there's also, more importantly, this like illusion of choice, and that a lot of men are like, I don't want to commit to one woman now because I think that I can go out there and find something better, or like something better might come along. And you're constantly flooded with sexualized content, whether it's through advertising or social media or just in day-to-day life. And I do think that has an impact on it as well.
And there's also two sides of it. I mean, it's difficult to look at it from the woman's perspective, but also their intention to just work more has gone up. Like, the average age that a woman has a child went from 25 to 27 and a half in the last 10 years, 15 years. So that just tells you where priorities are and where they're heading. And with that change, if women are being more career driven, then they're not focused on a relationship as much. So it's also kind of both sides of it, where if men don't feel financially secure and women want to become financially secure, then it's almost both sides of the coin are waiting on a certain event to occur to make something happen or feel more secure.
And just to point out, I think this has a cascading effect, right? Because the less people have children, then the less it's like present in culture. And so then that affects other people to say, should I have a child now or should I wait a little bit longer? And then that creates like a cycle. So it keeps getting pushed back a year or two farther and farther. And I think the main issue that all of this brings up, if you want to ask, well, does this affect economics? Like, is this just a happiness thing? Is that the US and actually the Western world in general, and a lot of Asian countries, are at record low fertility rates. And this has been something that Elon Musk has pointed to, that if you do not have a replacement rate of 2.1 children per couple or per two people, right, then you are not replacing the previous generation. And the effects that has down the line are most likely terrible for a society. reduces innovation, creates massive tax burdens to take care of older people on younger generations, et cetera, less brain power just in general for innovation. Cities get smaller, certain cities start going away, people move to the bigger cities. So I think if that's like the main issue that we're looking at, and I think a lot of politicians are actually really interested in this issue. JD Vance and Trump had talked about a $5,000 child tax credit. The Kamala Harris campaign jumped in with a $6,000 child tax credit, I think I read somewhere. I mean, people are really interested in this issue, and I think we'd highlighted before, but the city of Tokyo came out with its own dating app to try to get its citizens to start dating or get them dating more so that they can have children. So, although this shouldn't be like have babies, like this is the most important thing, and it feels weird to like say it from a utilitarian perspective. These are kind of one of the fundamental blocks economically of why a society thrives. And that's not to say that that's why you should have children, but it is a really important issue for the future of society. And I think a lot of people are making the decision that it's probably not worth it, right?
I think that that's such a crucial framing of this problem, is just how big the implications of this are. Like if you have a declining birth rate, there's a very bleak outlook for your country as a whole. And there's a lot of societies that are undergoing that, namely China, where they intentionally mutilated the birth rate with the one-child policy, and they're suffering the consequences of that. Of course, here in the U.S. context, we didn't have a government-mandated restriction on the amount of children that you can have, but there's societal causes at play, and that's what we're getting at here, the technology, the attitudes around dating. But Felipe, you're entirely right. This is an incredibly large problem that people at the highest levels of government and policymaking are trying to fix around the world with different incentive structures, whether financial or social or otherwise. I was thinking more so about it in like the personal context and me and my friends, but that is such an important element, is the greater societal shift that's going on. I mean, Gavin, you mentioned 25 to 27 and a half over the past 10 years. It's hard to imagine all the implications of that, the huge cascading effect that will happen as a result of people living markedly different lives than we have for the past 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 generations, where the norm was get married in your early 20s and have children. By the time that you're 30, you have a few kids and you're settled and focused on life. And we're just seeing a real disruption of that for a multitude of reasons that we've talked about. The implications are massive on the personal level in terms of personal happiness, all the way up to community level, the state level, the national level, and the international.
It's definitely, I mean, there's just so many factors here, right? And it just tells you how big this issue is, and going forward where it is going to go. But I wonder if, I mean, it sounds crazy, but what if like dating apps then go to the metaverse? What if you get a profile in there, and then that's where it kind of evolves into, which is even a scarier thought. But in terms of solutions, like what do you guys think where can we go there?
In my opinion, the number one solution is prioritizing in-person experiences, is shifting away from relying on these dating apps. I mean, let's face it, I think a lot of people just use it for entertainment purposes and to provide this illusion like they're moving forward in their dating life somehow by having these chats and doing these swipes. But I think if people prioritize looking within their community, within their activity groups, within their hobbies, or even going to bars and restaurants and cold approaching people, I think that will really move the needle in terms of creating more authentic relationships that are based off of who the people are, as opposed to the online persona that they give off.
Yeah. On top of that, and like I know I gave it just a long bit about why the state has an interest in marriage, but I think on a personal level, and I think this is something that all three of us and Micah all like agree with, is that and has been like a fundamental premise underneath this podcast, is that happiness doesn't come from technology or being online or scrolling mindlessly through Instagram. It comes from human relationships, from love and whatnot. And so whether that be romantic or friendship or whatever. And I do think that Gen Z has a unique challenge because we were thrown into this like experimental technology with social media and increased screen time, and we're trying to figure our way out around it. And yeah, I mean, the solution to this is getting people to get off their phones and hang out with one another in person. And I do think that there is a response, a growing response among young people. There are things like running clubs that initially were just for people to run, but now everyone's saying that they're essentially dating circles almost, or ways for people to meet other potential mates. And so I do think that the only way though you change this economy is by getting people to have a demand for more in-person experiences, to meet people, to connect and whatnot. So I think that it only changes when people demand the change, right?
Do you guys think that events held for the purpose of dating would be popular? Like, what if there was a running club that was for the intention of dating, and like an event, just random events that were for that purpose? Do you think that would be useful?
Yeah, I do think that single events are helpful. I mean, I remember growing up and hearing ads on the radio for single meetup events in DC. I think that it can get kind of weird if you like go into an event and you know everybody's single. You're probably like, there's probably some expectations there that might not be healthy. I just think that this is the kind of counterbalance to that massive uptick in online dating that we saw in that chart, is that there is going to be groups like this rising up. Running clubs, kayaking, talking about philosophy, whatever. People just wanting to get in person, get in front of other young people, and if there's any potential mates in there. And I think that is such an important part of kind of the solution question and conversation. And then I think that the next level is showing up to those relationships authentically, presenting yourself in the best way that you know how, which I'm learning how to do in my romantic relationship now, is like communicating clearly, showing up authentically, and being as much of myself as possible, which I think a lot of people, including myself in our generation, are really digging into learning how to do as we continue in our 20s, but also as we kind of course correct from this morphed sense of reality that technology has given us.
And I think over the next couple of years, we're at this point, a turning point in not only social media, but also the impacts of what we're talking about here, of meeting online and relationships that met online as well. So I feel like there's just this changing of the tide, and there has to be some type of counterbalance, like you said. Like, what if there was a technology that was the exact same thing as a dating app, but only if you were near that person and had the chance to go up to them? So that is a very interesting thought as well, or just business. Like, that'd be a good idea.
Shout out to my friend Callie. It's a girl in her 20s, Gen Zer in Washington, D.C., building a dating app that the whole premise is, are you free tonight? Yes, let's go on a date. None of the photo, none of the AI scripted prompts and BS chatting, just two people connecting and going on a date. And I think that if we are going to utilize this tool of technology, which is it, I see that as being a more authentic and better future for online dating, is a tool to get people to just meet initially and then let them loose in the wild as quickly as possible.
The one fear I have there is that people just have become so used to instant gratification and just like the quick, mindless like scrolling or just going through all of these profiles, and there's really no way to combat that if everyone's used to it.
But I think that people will self-segregate, right? The people that want these apps for entertainment and to scroll will continue on Tinder and Hinge and those. And the ones that really want to meet and date will turn to these new alternatives that provide better results. I think that this is a perfect example of the free market in action.
Yeah, maybe we should have her on. Talk
Yeah.
about that.
I'm sure she'd love to.
That'd be a good combo.
But wow, what a big topic. I mean, I'm really happy that Felipe brought up the point of the larger implications, because that's, I think, a really important conversation to have, is what happens when you have a declining birth rate and when young people aren't meeting up and getting married and having kids. We can obviously speak about that anecdotally from our level as being in Gen Z and experiencing dating cultures in different cities and different places across the US. But my overall takeaway is one of hope, and obviously technology has had a huge impact on our generation, one that we're still exploring. I'm still exploring personally how it's affecting me, and as a generation it will probably take us a lifetime to see how the implications of technology are impacting different areas of our life. Dating is certainly a big one of them. That chart that we showed in the beginning, I think, is the best example possible of that. But I have so much hope that something foundational, as corny as it sounds, to the human experience is love, will shine through technological updates, and that people will continue meeting each other, getting married, having babies, and moving this beautiful human race into the future.
Well said. And I think we can wrap it up there as Felipe joins us back. But thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode 37, the Gen Z podcast. Have a good weekend,
Bye.
and we will see you next time.